Thank you, sir.
Look at that. All right. I'll walk through the sheet real quick. I'll point out a couple things that are important legally for you guys because you are a organization with a budget and power. You should try to have minutes and an agenda every meeting. Okay? Couple things. I like this because it's real simple. Angela, I think you've got a copy of it. Fundamentals of parliamentary procedure. Justice and courtesy for all. Okay? Courtesy is the big thing. Address only one issue at a time. And I know that can be difficult. In this room, the MSUM Student Senate meets. And they are real strict about one issue at a time because they can diverge into all kinds of different areas. So, one issue at a time. Once that issue is resolved, then move on to the next issue. And it's the discretion of the chair to say that's not germane. Throw that word up there. Not germane, not German.
Oh, yeah.
Not germane, there we go. To the discussion. Means it's not relevant, it's not appropriate to the discussion. Yes, sir.
Who's the chair?
Chair would be the president.
Chair, what is the role of chair?
The role of chair is a non-voting member of the assembly who maintains order and breaks ties, just like the mayor of Moria. So generally you should refrain from providing input during discussion. After the motion and the second opens up discussion, you should try to refrain from input, and then if a tie happens, then you can add input at the end. But that way, some organizations will have a parliamentarian or someone else who does the debate so everybody can get involved. But in your organization, you have a chair who takes that role.
And the chair for our organization can be me, or if I pass the gavel to someone else, that person that acts as chair lets their vote go and offers me the opportunity to vote in their stead. So it's the chair position.
Number 3, the majority rules. Number 4, respect the rights of the minority. 5, each proposition is entitled to a full and free debate. And 6, this is the most important thing. The purpose is to facilitate action, not to obstruct it. So don't use parliamentary procedure to obstruct action. You want to use parliamentary procedure to keep the meeting moving forward.
So no grabbing your phone with your reading.
No, and that's where the chair becomes so important. And trying to
Out of order.
Well, and you can also call. Hopefully, you guys have enough of a relationship that you'll be collegial that you don't do that. But you can. We'll get into it later. You can stop discussion and simply call for the vote and move on. Underlying principles, parliamentary procedure, organization is paramount. All members are equal. You got to have a minimum number of voting members to get quorum, depending on what your rules say. And quorum is important if there's any budgetary or legal issues that you're bringing up, because they can be questioned. If you had a group outside of normal meeting hours, if you have quorum present, you are in session. So be careful with that. Only one member has the floor at the same time. Discussion is not in order unless there is a pending question, but I'll talk about that in a minute. If there's an issue under discussion, not the person, personal remarks are not in order. A question once decided may not be brought up again at the same meeting. A majority vote decides, 2/3, that'll all be in your bylaws. Silence is regarded as consent. So if Jeremiah says, all those in favor, and you get ayes, and someone is reading something or doing something and they don't say anything, that's counted as a yes vote, not a no vote. Okay? Unless you say, I'm not voting on this, you are voting on it. Meeting minutes. Minutes do not have to reflect the discussion that's held within the group, unless you want future senates or SGAs to have that information. Okay? So it makes minutes, can be very simple. Motion, second, and the vote. You are not required to, Jeremiah said this, da-da-da, Charles said this. You don't have to put that in there, okay? And it makes taking minutes a lot easier, okay? If there are issues that you want to record the discussion, you can do that if you would like. So, the minutes content, date, time, and place of meeting, attendance of members. Every motion. Identify the maker of the motion, the fact that the motion was seconded, other motions that apply to the main motion, okay? So, you can have a motion. I move that we spend $500 doing whatever. Someone can amend the main motion to say, I'd like to amend the main motion to state that we will give the $500 once this group has found a faculty advisor, whatever it is, okay? Whatever it is. But you can't amend the amendment.
You can re-amend the main motion.
You have to, yes, you have to
You have to
vote,
make a new
you vote on
motion.
the amendment first, and then once that's done, you go back to the main motion, then you can make a second amendment onto the main motion. That way you're not hooking amendments upon amendments upon amendments, because then it comes down, what are we voting on here?
Mhm.
And then the question is, can you restate the motion? Because you want to vote on one thing at a time. So if you're voting on the amendment, get the amendment out of the way, go back to the main motion. Yes?
And you can approve or deny that amendment. If you deny that amendment, you go back to the main motion. If you approve that amendment, you go back to the main motion as amended.
And you need a motion and a second on an amendment too. Okay? So the motion on the table is that we approve $500 for the Star Wars Club on M State. Okay? Mr. Chair, I'd like to amend that motion. We have a motion to amend. Do we have a
Is there
second?
seconder?
If you don't get a second, it dies. Okay? So if it's something, if you have someone who is just throwing amendments out there, you can just refuse to second the amendment and it dies. Okay? And you can't bring it up again and again and again and again until you bully the board into seconding the thing. So if you've got something you want to bring forward, it's a good idea to know that you've got someone who's willing to second your motion. Otherwise, you're just going to be frustrated. Okay? Items ordinarily not included, and you guys don't have to follow this exactly, but discussion, and you don't have to identify who seconded the motion. You can if you'd like. The reason it's nice is that if you will get a new group of SGA folks next year. It's nice to go back, if someone on the board was the seconder or was part of that discussion, you can go back and talk to them and ask them the gist of it. Order of business. So on your agenda, and agendas come in all, you've got an agenda for today. One thing that's nice on agendas, so you approve the agenda, minutes. Okay, and you can do that under what's called consent.
Which is
Sure.
simplified form.
Simplified form, we could say, handle this under consent, or do I have a motion on consent? And let's say it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and these two are issues that need action, but the chair is determined won't have any controversy. Can we act on these consent items, and that's just one vote, and you take it. If you want to pull something off consent, you make the motion to pull something off consent for it to be discussed. Yes?
And typically in a meeting, what I'll do is I'll say, I'm going to approve this by general consent. Are there any objections? Objections, and that's your opportunity to deny that general consent and say, no, I'm not okay with this.
I want to pull number 5, or I want to discuss number 5. And, formality, as long as the group is operating well, then you can be less formal, but you need a motion and a second and the vote recorded for whoever the secretary is. Okay? But as long as the group is functioning, the formality can get a little looser. If there begins to become, if the group becomes dysfunctional, that's where this becomes very important. Because this can force order on a dysfunctional board. Does that make sense? I mean, if you guys are generally in agreement, then just record what you need to record legally, and you can be a little more free and open. If it starts to get dysfunctional, the chair needs to step in and impose order upon the group. Okay? Otherwise, what will happen is people will quit. They'll say, it's not worth it, I've got better things to do than show up and get yelled at. Okay? And that's where you have a discussion with your chair and say, you know, either you do something, or I'm going to call for you to resign, or I'm going to resign from the SGA. Okay? If there's personal attacks, either within or outside, talk to Angela. Make sure that doesn't happen.
And we have a chain of command, so if you have an issue with another senator, or with Angela, or anyone, you can talk to me. If you have an issue with me, or you can't deal with an issue with someone else with me, Angela's your second line of command. And if you can't deal with it with Angela or I, in that, me or Angela in that order, then there's a dean that you can talk to. Sean Anderson is your next resource. And that's all on the bylaws.
Now, on your agenda, you may want to list things out, and then next to them, this is kind of nice. Say you got the agenda, the minutes, taking of the roll, or whatever, okay? So taking of the roll would be first, and then agenda minutes, whatever number 3 is. In parentheses, next to an item, you can say action required, okay? Which means you have to have a motion and a second and go through the procedure. But if it's just something to be discussed, you can just discuss it. We're moving on to item number 5, discussion on 10th anniversary celebrations on campus. You don't need a motion and a second to open up into a discussion, because you don't need a vote.
Unless we decide to spend money, or we need to put in a facilities request, or there's some action that we actually need to take as an organization, that someone needs to do specific work.
So it's nice to go through an agenda and just kind of label where action is required and where it's just simply discussion. And just knock it out. Here's an order of business. You can use that. You can use whatever you'd like, whatever you have customarily used. You need to adjourn the meeting at some point. When you adjourn the meeting, you can go into general discussion or whatever else you'd like. Once you're done with the business of the meeting, it's good to just adjourn the meeting. And then people can leave and do what they want, and you can continue discussion.
And once it's adjourned, you are free to leave. The meeting is officially over, but if there's continuing discussion that you want to be a part of, then you have an option to stay. And I'm typically pretty good about adjourning a meeting.
And if it's an hour-long meeting, try to keep it within an hour. So open it, close it. If people want to hang out afterwards and discuss things, but then you can't reopen the meeting, because there's a period of official notice within your bylaws of a day or whatever it is. So you can't adjourn the meeting and then 15 minutes later say, well, let's reconvene the meeting because I want to make this motion and get this done. You can't do that. So you want to create a frame around the meeting where you're doing official business, and then you're out and you're doing your own thing. Does that make sense? Okay. Gender protocol. Chairman or chair is the same as the title as president, mayor, blah, 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 Mr. and Mrs., Madam Chair. Whatever you guys want to do on that is up to you. Here it's MSUM, it's chair, then last name. So it's gender neutral, or senator, then last name. Or in city council, alderman, councilman, council person. We've had to wrestle through that for the last 10 years.
I must say Mr. President, Miss President, Mrs. President.
And typically now they go to president, whatever, and just leave it gender neutral. And move forward. So back page. Formal method of presenting and processing a motion. Member rises to address the chair. You don't literally have to rise to address the chair. two fingers up or hand up. Chair, I would like to make a motion, on agenda item number 5. That's all. You're just being recognized. When they say rise, you're just asking for recognition. And the chair has to recognize you. The chair cannot not recognize you. Yes.
But it has to be on the agenda, so if you're completely off topic, then it becomes a request to be added to a future agenda, or you can move to amend the agenda.
And you can agenda, or you can have something down here in the bottom, it's called new business. And you can move it down there.
You can add
You can do whatever you want under new business.
after the agenda's already been approved.
Yes. And you can also amend the agenda. At this point, number 1, you can amend the agenda. You can say, we don't have enough information to discuss number 3, or Angela was supposed to be here today to discuss number 3. She's not able to join us, so we will remove that from the agenda for today.
And I guess old business or unfinished business.
Unfinished business, stuff that's been tabled to a later meeting. I'll talk about tabling in there. Member makes a motion, another member seconds the motion, chair then repeats the motion. Once you got a motion and a second, then it goes to discussion. Can't be discussed. The chair can't open up with a 5-minute discussion. Okay?
So it's been moved by Treasurer Brandt to talk about giving $500 for lights for the parade, seconded by Administrative Assistant Vigstill, sorry, in a second. Would the motioner like to speak to it? And then you get to talk about it. Would the seconder like to speak about it? Then you get to talk about it. And then open discussion regarding it. And then once everybody's done discussing, then you can make amendments or do what you want, and then vote.
And basically it's to the discretion of the chair. Once hands quit going up, then it's, are we ready for a vote? It'll be as simple as that. Okay. Chair takes vote on motion. Chair announces the result of vote. And you can either do a roll or a voice. If you do a voice and you get more than a couple people dissenting, you may want to do a roll.
Yep.
Just to make sure that you're getting it accurately.
And it is so completely okay to disagree.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Informal method in routine and non-controversial matters, the chair may use a routine method called general consent. Okay. Without objection, we will blah blah blah. You can read that on your own. Amendments to motion. To modify wording of a pending motion, it must be germane. Look at that, I spelled germane wrong. Germane to the pending motion, but the result may be to produce the opposite effect intended by the pending motion. Okay. Primary only applies to the main motion. Secondary applies to pending amendment, is also referred to an amendment to amendment. It can be no third degree. So you can amend it. You make the motion, amendment, you can amend the amendment. I would suggest you don't. I know it's opposite of what I just said, and I'll tell you why. So let's play this. If I amend the amendment, what are we voting on?
We're voting on the amendment to the amendment.
We're voting on the amendment to the amendment.
So let's say that somebody moves to offer $500, and somebody else moves to offer $250, and then I move to amend the amendment to $250 to actually give $600 instead of $500 or $250. Is everybody following?
So then actually what you're voting on is the 650, not the 250, not the 500. Because now you have an amendment on the amendment to the main motion. And this is why you can't, under Robert's rules, amend the amendment. And sometimes it's very simple. A wording, someone screwed up the wording. The main motion is to give $500 to the art group, okay? And it's actually the art club. And so you want to, Mr. Chair, I'd like to amend the amendment to clarify that it's the art club, not the art group.
In a lot of those cases, we'll actually know what is being referred to, but if it's not, if there's actually a discrepancy, like there's two dental groups on campus and somebody says the wrong one, that is actually an issue where it's appropriate to make.
Form of amendment, you say I move to amend the motion to add or strike a word, insert words or substitute things, okay? But generally, if you can get agreement on the motion with one amendment, then go back to the main motion. Does that make sense?
And you can get, in discussion, come to a different agreement, and if the original motioner agrees, they can make a friendly amendment. So basically, they just say, Mr. Chair, I'd like to change my motion to this.
Yeah, and generally you don't need a vote for that. The less complicated you get, I mean, what you're trying to get away from is confusion.
Keep it simple.
Keep it simple. And the
Utilize
chair,
the
the
rules
chair
for
in groups I've been in, the chair will often have to remind the speaker that they are speaking to an amendment or an amendment to the amendment and not to the main motion. Because discussion, when you get too many of these, people start talking about the main motion, and then you forget that you've got an amendment hanging out there, and so the secretary has recorded that there's been an amendment to the main motion, and there's never a vote on the amendment to the main motion, and everybody thinks that they're voting on the main motion when you've forgotten to vote on the amendment to the main motion. So make sure that your chair is, and if he doesn't catch it, say, Mr. Chair, I believe we have an amendment to the main motion that needs action. But that's why amending amendments, it gets, hangs up meetings and it gets confusing. So, stuff in the gray box is completely up to you. If you want to introduce business, Chair, I move that, to adjourn. I move that we adjourn the meeting. The chair can't just say, we're adjourned. And here's the reason why. You don't want to get in a situation where discussion gets heated or the chair is losing a series of votes and simply declares the meeting adjourned. The chair cannot do that. There must be a motion and a second to adjourn the meeting. Now, you are a group within a governmental agency, and I don't know what open meeting laws apply or anything else, but you need to open the meeting and close the meeting. And that's important. Yes, sir.
So if he was to say to adjourn it during that, like you said, and then someone, like you were just mentioning how the vote's losing,
Yeah.
and then someone was to second it, then it could close?
No.
No?
Well, he would have to call to adjourn the meeting. If he said, I call to adjourn this meeting, he can't do that as chair. Someone else could say, I call to adjourn this meeting. Then they would need a second, and then you would have a vote.
So it's not my job in the meetings to make decisions for the group or to do any decision making. It's the role of the group to do their decision making.
The chair can't make the motion.
It's my position to make sure that the meeting is running smoothly and things are getting done. Keep on track with the agenda.
Otherwise, I mean, think of the situation where you're trying to remove the chair, and the chair simply adjourns the meeting. This meeting's over, and the chair can stand up and walk out of the room. That meeting is still going on. And that's why you have a vice chair. And if the vice chair is not there, you've got a secretary. And if the secretary is not there, you've got the treasurer or the administrative assistant. And even if all of them get up and leave, but once you fall below quorum, then the meeting is automatically over. You can't fall below quorum, okay? At that point, you probably need to get a hold of Angela or Sean.
Well, we have a bit of a predicament because we're starting below quorum.
Well, you can declare that quorum is the majority of those that have been elected and seated. Which is probably what you're gonna have to do.
Well, we need to check in with MSUSA.
Yep. I agree.
And figure that out. And the other thing a chair can do, and it's kind of, a chair can simply declare quorum. And if no one objects, then there is quorum.
There's people not there to object to the
It's
declaration. That's like
it's not a an ethical use of the quorum rules, but it is true that you can simply declare quorum.
Okay.
Now, if any decision was made
Mhm.
where that would be called into question,
Sure.
you would lose.
Or would have to justify my decision.
Because the secretary would keep the roll that clearly
Sure.
shows that quorum was not present.
But if everyone who's currently elected is present and there's nobody else from student representation to,
Call MNUSA and
MSUM.
get that answer. Looking at your
Yeah.
bylaws, you are really, I mean, you are trapped, I think, within the election, and I don't know. I honestly don't know under your bylaws unless there's a discrepancy between the bylaws and the charter
and there are,
on that question. Then you've got to go back.
Yeah.
But,
Which we will.
and generally quorum is the majority of those elected and seated.
Yep.
I've run into situations, I'm running into it with the Human Rights Council right now, where I don't have enough people for quorum, but we have bylaws that clearly state that we have a set number, and a majority of that number has to be there. It's not it doesn't give us any discretion, it has to be a majority.
Is the chair included in the quorum number?
Mhm.
Okay.
If they're an elected member. Now, if they're a parliamentarian, then they're not. And you'll run into that sometimes where you'll have someone who's simply hired as a parliamentarian. Like if Angela was running the meetings.
Mhm.
And
Nobody, yeah, obviously I wouldn't
No.
call it quorum.
and yours is interesting, but the reason they do that is because you do have budget and you have the ability to do a lot of stuff if you want to. Yeah, so, a point of privilege, if you want to get this detailed, the meeting I was at, there was food and other stuff. You could say, Chair, a point of privilege, please. Could everybody put their Cheetos away or quit tapping on the computer? It's just a nice way to do that, instead of saying, put your Cheetos away, Because you gotta remember, in any group like this, you wanna be as professional as possible, no matter how much you like or dislike the person who's speaking. No huffing, no grumping, no sighing, no getting up and going to the bathroom while just keep it moving. And, if you're gonna be on these things for the rest of your life, and you want to be professionally invited to be parts of boards of directors and advisory boards and boards in the city. And if you're the guy that humps and grumps and gets up and makes loud noises, or the gal that does that, it's not good professionally. There's a lot of opportunities in life that come through sitting on boards, and simply being a good board member, someone that they want to work with on a board. And you'll find that people will ask you, people you disagree with politically or personally, will ask you to be on board because you're a good board member. You're someone they know will show up, will do their homework, and will be respectful. And it's hard to find people who want, obviously, it's hard to find people who want to be on boards. But it's really good for you professionally to be, in some professions like banking and law and a few other things, you are, part of the professional ethic of that job is to be part of that board. So the rest of these, to end debate, I moved the previous question, rare. One last thing, and you can take a look at this. Tabling is non-debatable. It's one of the few things, there's a couple other things too if you really want to get deep in the rules. But tabling, if you want to postpone a vote, say you need to have something answered. Okay? Is this group that has requested money from us a real group? Okay? A group comes to you and says the motorcycle club of M State wants $500. And it gets on the agenda and he brings it up and someone says, are you a real group? Have you gone through the process of, do you have a faculty advisor? Well, I can't answer that right now. Then you would say, well, Chair, I'd like to table this motion. And you can either set a point to our next meeting or leave it open. Chair, I'd like to table this until next week, or Chair, I'd just like to table this motion. Then Get the motion, then you need a second, and there's no discussion on the table. Okay, and then once you have the vote, it's tabled, it's done, you move on to the next item.
So in a meeting, if there's something that you're not ready to vote on at any time, you can table it. Obviously, we wanna use these rules to get business done, but you also have certain rights, and those rights are my job to uphold in meetings.
And take a look at your bylaws and anything else that might impact it. But parliamentary procedure, generally what you need is what needs to be recorded in the minutes. Motion, the second, the votes. The fact that you approve the agenda of the minutes and you had quorum, and that you adjourn the meeting. That's about it. You don't have to take motions on issues simply to be discussed. If a committee has got a report, you don't have to take a motion to open up the discussion to have that committee report. The chair can simply say, Angela's here to give us an update on whatever, and you don't need to have a vote on that. It just opens up discussion. But that's why it's nice on your agenda if you do put into parentheses, action required or discussion or whatever else. Any questions? I'm a minute or two over. Any questions? Does it make sense?
Yeah.
Kinda,
For now.
for now.
Later, when we have a problem.
And I'll be around, And you can amend these, but what you wanna try to avoid clearly is any legal snafus, where someone could come back and question whether it was done properly. So motion, second, discussion, vote. Okay?
And if you have a question in a meeting, you can, what is it, a point of,
Parliamentary, yeah, don't even, just ask the
you can
question.
just ask a question. So get my attention in a meeting, and if you don't understand what we're voting on, or you have a question about how to do something in a meeting, but you want to do it, ask, how can I do this in the meeting structure, and we'll just move forward with that.
And that's a great time to
And
table
I
it.
have a little bit more experience. I'm not completely experienced with Robert's rules, but I've been around it a bit longer than most of you, unless you've experienced it before. So I have general understanding. If I don't, we have copies of Robert's rules here that are available in the office, and I'll probably bring them to meetings just in case.
And more groups are getting away from use of formal Roberts. FFA is one that continues to insist on use of that. But more and more, but what you don't want is to slide into a position where your meetings are so informal that if you were put on the stand, you could not have something right there that you could read and justify. Especially since you guys, by the nature of this board, will be moving on and off M-State. So 3 years from now, think about the senators who will be there, that they have clear minutes of what was done and what was approved.
And I will say that when I was hired, we had 0 minutes of historical context because they were not saved. And so with like for example, the fitness center, that